NFL Talking Heads Fantasy Football Podcast Show. Here are your hosts, Jeff Carrier and Seth Lowe.
Hello, everyone. Welcome into the NFL Talking Heads Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your host, Seth Lowe, here as usual with my co-host, Jeffrey Carrier. Today, we're going to be talking about the P.A.T.H system, something we introduced just this last season. Now, P.A.T.H, just for a quick recap for those of you who don't remember or are tuning in a little bit later, P.A.T.H is something we came up with, which is designed to be a quick evaluation process of what is important in a fantasy player. The concept, more P.A.T.H players can present higher percentage of success. Is any system perfect? No. Does the system have flaws? Sure. The goal of P.A.T.H, though, is for picking the cream of the crop and increasing, your chance of getting it right, picking the best players. That's the goal. So P.A.T.H being an acronym stands for points, age, team, and health. Some of the things that we think are most important when evaluating fantasy players and ensuring the highest, percentage of success. So points, when we look at points, we're talking about a player who is in the top 24 at their position, for running back / wide receiver, or top 12 for tight ends 2 out of the past 3 years. So a player has to be, an RB or wide receiver 2 at a minimum 2 out of the last 3 years for tight ends, top 12 tight end for 2 out of the past 3 years. For age, we're talking about 30 years or younger. So nobody, 31 or older. Team, the team is important. The team the player is on has to average 3 touchdowns per game. So the bar is set pretty low, but it's designed to kind of weed out the really, really bad offenses that you don't want to have players on. And then health. Availability can be a player's best asset. In this case, a player must have played 15 games or more for wide receivers, tight ends, for 2 out of the last 3 years. And for running backs, it's at least 14 games. So that's it. That's the P.A.T.H system. Again, points, age, team, health. Now, important thing to mention, some players this last year didn't qualify going into the season due to, the time served in the NFL. So, for example, Saquon Barkley, Chris Carson, Calvin Ridley, Juju, and Tyreek Hill weren't eligible because they'd only been in the league 1 year. Anything you want to add to that, Jeff, before I kick it over to you to talk about the players that made the cut for 2019?
Yeah, obviously we just threw a lot out there. I just went ahead on the live video and showed everyone, I'll go ahead and pull this back up for everyone so that way you can read it if you're watching the video as well. The goal is to have a objective, neutral process and system to evaluate what we deem important as fantasy football, which is obviously availability, being healthy, and scoring points, of course. So we put this system in place last year, and now we're taking our first chance to actually review it and see who made it through a arbitrary point evaluation scenario that we designated to be important for fantasy football without our opinions being involved, which is key. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to go and talk about the players that made the list, and then what was their outcome. What can we glean from this information? So yeah, just kind of follow up on what you said in terms of the underclassmen too. Is they partially met. Like every single rookie is not on the list because they didn't even qualify for one season. These rookies or second-year players qualified for 1 or 2 of their seasons, meeting all the requirements. They just didn't meet the 2 out of 3 best years to meet full requirement. So should I go ahead and read you off who was on the 2019 list, Seth, here? Just to kind of recap.
Yeah.
I'll read this off, and now it's a little bit different now that we've had the 2019 season, of course. But you tell me, looking back, what your initial reaction is to this list, or a couple initial reactions, should I say. So for the running backs, there's Saquon, Christian McCaffrey, Todd Gurley, Alvin Kamara, Ezekiel Elliott, James Conner, Mark Ingram, David Johnson, Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb, Tevin Coleman, Jordan Howard, Chris Carson, Devontae Freeman, Joe Mixon, Marlon Mack, and Lamar Miller. So there's a lot there. I think there's 17 on the running back list. So let's just start there and get your thoughts with the running backs. Your initial thoughts on who actually made the list going into the 2019 season.
Oof. I mean, it's a pretty big mix of players there. There's a lot of players we liked, a lot of players we didn't. I think that the one common thing that you see with those players for most of them is volume. Like Lamar Miller, regardless of what you think about Lamar Miller and Marlon Mack going into last year, they're high volume guys. They get a lot of touches. Same thing with Chris Carson. Tevin Coleman, the previous season, I believe was the year Devontae Freeman missed a lot of time, so Tevin Coleman got a lot of touches. Obviously, David Johnson was a big workhorse. So same thing with Mark Ingram, James Conner. So that's the biggest thing. The biggest takeaway with those players is his volume. Players that just get a lot of touches.
Yeah, and you're also going to notice a lot of younger players specifically on this list because they're running backs. Much different or a bit different than some of the wide receivers who's kind of been in the league for a few years. You can kind of really see that these running backs, once they hit a certain age, they clearly aren't making this list. I mean, there's Devontae Freeman that's on the list. There's Lamar Miller. Those are almost like in Todd Gurley. Those are kind of like the only veterans that are kind of on this list. You have a lot of young people that are on this list, and more what we call underclassmen. Again, if you're watching the video and we showed you the list here, I'm going to go ahead and go back and show you this whole list. If you could see the whole video with the blue highlights here of the underclassmen, there's a bit more under the running backs. So let's go ahead and pivot to wide receiver and tight ends, just kind of as receivers. We have Adam Thielen, Amari Cooper, Brandon Cooks, Calvin Ridley, Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, Jarvis Landry, Juju, Julio, Keenan Allen, Michael Thomas, Mike Evans, T.Y. Hilton, Tyreek Hill. Then for tight ends, Travis Kelce, Ertz, Kittle, Evan Ingram, Kyle Rudolph, and Cameron Brate. What's your thoughts and feedback there?
I think I don't think it's it's players you would expect. I think these are the best receivers. And a couple of these players, running backs and receivers, they switch teams like Jordan Howard and Jarvis Landry. So you gotta kind of factor that in. But obviously we're basing it off of their previous. They had to be a RB1, RB2, or wide receiver two in the past 3 seasons. So that doesn't take into account switching teams. But I think you look at there's no really big surprises when you look at those wide receivers, other than maybe Jarvis Landry might be the only somewhat surprising one, but even he's not very surprising. It's typically the best receiver. So I think it's a little bit less surprising than some of the running backs.
I got you. Yeah, I think overall you look at the list, and on initial gut reaction, especially looking back at the 2019 season, you say, well, there's a lot of really good names on this list. Like that's not overly surprising. The requirements make it hard, right? You have to be able to be a top, a tight end 1 or wide receiver / running back 2. So in the top 24, your team has to be scoring a minimum of 3 touchdowns per game, which most teams did. So that qualified most teams. But then the big kicker as well on top of scoring is that you have to be healthy. So that eliminated a lot of players. That in itself is going to kind of create cream of the crop. But when you really think about where some of these players were going in the draft, a large portion of these players are going outside of the first round. So that's where I was going to be very curious to see what kind of scoring success rate that we're going to get for people to kind of repeat being on the P.A.T.H system list, and what kind of success rate we're going to have, which I'm happy to report that it was outstanding numbers. But going back and looking at these names, Seth, we have a lot of people that we probably didn't talk enough about, and where we didn't go capture enough shares for, and they were going in the late 2nd, 3rd, 4th round. Some names that come to mind. Nick Chubb jumped up a bit, but Chris Carson himself even barely started squeaking into the late second, early third round. He was sitting there, very easy to get. Marlon Mack, Calvin Ridley. I mean, where was his draft stock? Very easy to get. Jarvis Landry, Tyreek Hill, even outside the first round. Mike Evans, Keenan Allen. I mean, some of these sound like no-brainers now.
Adam Thielen, Amari Cooper,
Adam Thielen. Some of these names, Mark Ingram, he actually, succeeded. So some of these names, let me go through who actually finished with a yes. That might be surprising. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen once again so everyone can see who finished as a P.A.T.H player this season that will be making the list the following year as well. We had the likes of Mark Ingram. If you could have gone an RB2 in the 5th round, wouldn't you have liked to have known that, or at least had a higher chance of drafting it? Devontae Freeman actually made this list. I was flabbergasted. Marlon Mack made it. Amari Cooper made it. Calvin Ridley made it. I mean, these are 3rd, 4th. Jarvis Landry, where was he going? 5th, 6th round last year. Same with Keenan Allen, Mike Evans, Tyreek Hill, and of course Kelsey, Ertz, and Kittle all made it. So I'm going to show you the success rate here on the video. The success rate with the running backs was 64.7%, nearly 65%. And that includes, everyone's going to have like injuries that might affect them making it. Like Adam Thielen, for example, didn't make it because of injury. And there's nothing you could do about that because this is an arbitrary, neutral system that's going to factor that in. But with the running backs, there are 2 players that are hit a little bit of a unique circumstance. And if we were to take out those 2 players just for fun, it would jump.
Can I guess who those players were?
Yeah, go ahead.
Jordan Howard?
Nope. Because he still played and he got hurt. That's normal. That's a normal season. Right? Just like Thielen.
Interesting. Okay, there goes my so then Lamar Miller wouldn't count either because he got injured.
Right. So that 65% is actually counting in Lamar Miller because technically he made the list, but that's one of the 2. He didn't even play all year, so that's technically a number that if we want to remove him, and there's one other player that comes to mind.
David Johnson being the 2nd?
Nope, because he started, he played, he just it is what it is. He's a running back. The other
Coleman.
Nope, same. He started, he played, he got hurt. He just is what it is. The other one is Kareem Hunt because he was suspended for 8 games. So those are 2 more unique scenarios of they didn't have the opportunity more so to compete for the P.A.T.H system, right?
Gotcha.
So if we remove those 2 players, we have a 73% chance at running back. A 73% chance. With all the running backs that entered the season, 64% for wide receivers, and then tight ends. I think we can. There's not a large sample size here, and we're going to track this year over year, but they're at 50%, so kind of a more of a crapshoot there. But we're at 65% for wide receivers, 64.
And I also think you could also include like David Johnson and James Conner. I know they both had injuries at different stages in the season, but even if you weren't on David Johnson as a first rounder, nobody predicted his fall from grace would be that steep and that quick. And then James Conner, they lost Big Ben in the first game, right? So that definitely didn't help James Conner. If Big Ben doesn't go down, who knows what happens with James Conner? So there's also a couple of those fluky situations where injuries are standard, but David Johnson also. That was just a really fluky situation just in general in terms of how bad he was.
Yeah. But, of course, that's for us to, if we really like someone, for us to kind of say, was the analysis correct? Does our opinion change on our thought process? But in the light of the P.A.T.H system, it is what it is, right? Because these types of years are going to happen. So I think that this is a pretty strong number, just because so many of these players are going outside the first round that going into 2020, I'm going to be very interested on seeing this full list, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to change my mind if there's a player on there that either I'm not talking enough about or that I don't like. A lot of these players, I wouldn't say we didn't like. We didn't like Tevin Coleman. and he actually didn't make it. So I think we're right there. But there's some players we just didn't talk enough about. Like Jarvis Landry, I'm not too sure we talked enough about. So this is going to present, I think, a good opportunity for us to reevaluate certain players that are making this list, knowing that we're going to have a 65% chance of hitting a RB wide receiver 2, no matter where we're selecting these players, wherever they're going. And it's obviously going to be a lot more attractive once we, the further they are in the draft.
Yep.
If they're on this list.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's not about. I mean, the system isn't really designed to like help you find players like that you never heard of. So it's not to find those diamonds in the rough, those like those sleepers. It's designed to just help you have more shares of the really good players that maybe you take for granted. If all things are equal, take the Jarvis Landry, Amari Cooper over the receiver like a Cortland Sutton, right? Somebody who came out of nowhere and had one good season and plays for a bad offense.
Repeat what your point was there.
Well, I'm just saying, like, you look at these lists, like what I said, these are a lot of the usual suspects, but that's kind of the point. It helps bring to light who the usual suspects are. So when you're drafting third, fourth, fifth round, and you have a choice between, or somebody like a Cortland Sutton, for example, who had one really good season and plays on a bad offense, or taking somebody like Amari Cooper, if all things are equal, you can fall back on the P.A.T.H system and say, okay, I'm going to take the safer bet, take the points, which is something we always preach.
Yep. And so, a great example, too, like Josh Jacobs was going right around Amari Cooper. And I'm sure Josh Jacobs probably made this list going into 2020. But there's probably a couple other people that were going right around Amari Cooper that did not make this list and that did not finish as wide receiver 2. And how, we overthink it a lot in fantasy football to kind of your point. Like, why was Jarvis Landry going as low as he was last year? He had made the list, was an easy draft capital pick, yet was not loved enough, clearly, and still ended up succeeding and finished as a wide receiver too. Because you know who wasn't on this list?
Who?
ODB, right? Why was ODB not on this list? Because of health reasons. So you have his counterpart on the same exact team. What a great example. You have his counterpart, ODB, on the same exact team with the same offense, same quarterback, going at pick, 13, 14 last year? And then Jarvis Landry's going, pick rounds 5, 6? And one was on this list and one wasn't. And that just goes to show you sometimes that, just in general, when it comes to fantasy football and you have opinions involved, this is going to be, I think, strike a good balance for us as we review it and year over year as we get more data.
Yep.
Any additional thoughts, Seth, as we kind of push the P.A.T.H system into 2020? Just any additional thoughts?
No, I just think you just got to trust the system. There's always going to be like Adam Thielen, for example, was remarkably healthy, and he had we talked about him in our last episode,
right,
where he got hit with the injury bug. You just gotta, these freak things happen, these freak situations happen. You just got to trust the P.A.T.H system, and just take the points. So more often than not, I think like 65% is a very, very high percentage. And when you take out the Lamar Miller. And who was the other player you mentioned?
Kareem
Lamar
Hunt.
Miller
And Kareem Hunt. It goes up to 73.
Yeah. So that's pretty good. And then on top of that, in addition to the P.A.T.H system, then you're using you filter it down to those players, right? The P.A.T.H system, and then from there, use common sense, use your own personal preference, and maybe you can whittle it down even further and increase your percentages from there.
Yeah. I think last year when we released the P.A.T.H system, we weren't too sure what to expect in terms of success. So I think now, looking forward, we can definitely be on board of buying into it, seeing who the players are, and believing into it. So, and hopefully this will get adopted by a lot of players listening and contribute to everyone's team and success.
and ours too, right? Hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're using PATH system, so.
All right, that's a quick episode for us. We just kind of wanted to recap the 2019 PATH, and we are the NFL Talking Heads. And thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the NFL Talking Heads Fantasy Football Podcast.